All right, so good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Arya, and I'm joined here with Manal as your co-hosts for Women Leading Change, a conversation that will center around leadership and empowerment through the experiences of our amazing panelists, Neera Nundy, Selena Cesar Chavannis, and Lorraine Gray, each who is an inspiring leader in her own field.
Throughout this year, it has been a goal of our prefect team to bring conversations of women empowerment to the forefront. We started the year off with organizing an event in celebration of International Day of the Girl, and built off of this with our first ever Women's Empowerment panel. We are so excited to continue this critical discussion tonight to honor the importance of student voice and agency at Trafalgar. In our role as prefects, we think it's essential to inspire girls in our community to ask critical questions and amplify their voices. In addition, if you would like to listen to this conversation again, it will be available on our Prefect podcast, which is streamed on Spotify. And a recording of this webinar will also be sent out to those in our community who are in different time zones and unable to join us tonight. Also, a warm welcome to our new Trafalgar students joining us. We are so excited to have you here. And now, without further ado, I'll hand it back to Arya to introduce our lovely panelists.
So our first panelist is Selena Cesar Chavannis, a leader we really look up to in our community. Selena served as a member of Parliament in the House of Commons of Canada and now uses her platform to speak about issues related to social justice and mental health. She was named one of the most influential people of African descent, Global 100 Under 40, Politics and Governance and Black Parliamentarian of the Year in 2017.
Next, we would like to welcome back Neera Nundy, who shared invaluable insight at our first Women's Empowerment panel. Neera is the co-founder of Thusra, a strategic philanthropy organization that works to enable social entrepreneurs and funders to reach goals in areas such as gender, urban resilience, and sanitation. She is a recipient of the Canadian Governor-General's Medallion, the Forbes Philanthropy Award in the Crossover Leaders category for 2014, and was awarded Vogue Woman of the Year, Agent of Social Change in 2019.
And last but certainly not least, we would like to introduce Lorraine Gray, a professional engineer and inspiring leader who has been in the electricity sector for over 16 years, 13 of which have been in leadership positions. Her current position is Director of Station Services at Hydro One, and she is the first ever woman to hold this role. In 2020, Lorraine was recognized as Canada's top 100 most powerful women by Women's Executive Network.
Now that you've been introduced to our panelists, let's get right into our questions. To start off, our first question is your career something that you have always wanted to pursue, or was it a less linear path to get there? How did you discover what you were passionate about? Selena, would you mind starting us off?
Oh my goodness, of course. Well, thank you, Manal and Arya, for having me here this evening. Thank you to Trafalgar for opening up your doors once again to having very great conversations about empowerment and about our continued struggle for liberation and equity. And I just want to say, to start off, that I am speaking to you from my home in Whitby, which is not too far from Trafalgar, which is on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island, Williams Treaty Territory. And I think that's important to acknowledge, because as we fight for liberation, as we fight for equity, we must join arms with our Indigenous brothers and sisters to ensure that that happens. But to answer your question more specifically, was it a linear line? Absolutely not. Did I want to be a politician when I grew up? When I was your age? No, I was supposed to be a neurosurgeon. So I don't know how I veered off that path, but that's how life works. Life is a roller coaster, right? You could keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle, or you could let your arms go and, take the ride as it goes along. And I think that throughout the mistakes that I've made, the challenges that I've had, the ups and downs of that roller coaster ride, I've learned a little bit about resilience and about pivoting. And sometimes when I was in high school, or specifically in grade 12, I had my little pen and paper, and I knew next was U of T, next was med school, next was this, next was that. And then every single path along the way, a monkey wrench was thrown in, or I threw my own monkey wrench in most of the time. And it veered me off course. But I think one of the things that I know I did have after high school was one of the most challenging parts of my life in university. But one of the things that I did have was the foundation that I created from my education in high school. And that foundation was built on a certain amount of values and principles. And no matter what happened to me afterwards, I knew I had that foundation to get back up and stand on my feet. Sometimes I rested a little while I was down because I had to figure out the lesson that what the mistake was trying to teach me. But once I stood back up, I knew that there was only one direction to go in. And it may have veered sideways and the other side before it went forward, but it was always forward. So, you know, you take the good with the bad and the ups and downs of life, but eventually you keep going. I think that was the question. I hope I answered it correctly.
Yeah, you did. Thanks so much, Selena. Lorraine, would you like to go next, please?
Sure. So in my position, I lead a team of 800 field individuals. So what we do is we maintain a very, very, very large proportion of the electricity grid for the province of Ontario. And so, as you mentioned, doing what I do as a woman, that's never happened before. So to answer the question of whether or not it was a linear path, you know, I like Selena's answer because, like, is it ever really linear? No. Are we ever 100% sure about where we're going? You know, not completely, but the goal is to follow your curiosity and to follow what it is that really gets you excited and gets you out of bed every day. And so I always knew that I was going to be a leader. With that, I was certain. I remember being a young girl and being labeled as bossy. And so I was always going to be a leader. And what's kind of funny is that I saw a hard hat in my future. I don't know why. I was inspired by seeing women who were deviating from the norm. And so I knew that I was going to do that. And my father, who understood my strengths, pointed me in the direction of engineering. And I think he was right. But, you know, I will say, you know, the one thing that when I mentor young women, they often ask about, you know, how do you know when you find the one? And they are usually referring to the one career or the one job. There is no such thing. There is no the one. I've held over 10 roles in my organization as I've progressed through the organization, and I've loved all but one. So it's about aligning what you do best every day, what you are really good at. And I think that it's not just one job. There's many of them.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. That was incredible insight. Yuri, would you like taking it away from here?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And what a privilege to be speaking to all of you, but being on this panel, I just recognized, I think I'm the oldest on this panel, which is very exciting for me. And I'm dialing in all the way from Mumbai, India. And so with all of the COVID tragedy around, I thought, let me just ignore all of that, but also invite you in. And thank you for inviting me here to chat a bit about, you know, life in general. And just congratulations to Dr. Foster and the team to really bring all of this to Trafalgar. So I'm a Trafalgar alumni. I was also a prefect. I absolutely miss those Blazers. And life, I would admit, is not a straight line. It is zigzag. But I do remember when I was your age, I desperately wanted it to be a straight line. And so let's not shy away from, you probably think it's going to be a straight line, but put a timeline on those straight lines. There's no such thing as forever. And so in chunks of sort of 4 to 5 years is usually where I've seen, at least for my life, I've pivoted. So I wasn't a great risk taker. I grew up with very strong women in my life. So I took that for granted, having gone to an all-girls school, having grown up with, you know, engineers in my family that were women, doctors that were women. It didn't occur to me that the norm in the world actually wasn't about powerful women. And so when I did go to university, I studied actuarial science, is very strong in math. I was supposed to be an engineer, Lorraine, but I wasn't very good in physics. So I was like, okay, I can't be an engineer. Then I was like, oh, I'll be a doctor. But I wasn't that great in getting high grades. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll do this thing called actuarial science. I did that and then discovered something called business, which was far more easier, where 60% of your grade was putting your hand up and saying something. So I graduated from Western. I went into investment banking. And the reason I'm saying I went into banking, then I went and did my MBA at Harvard, and then I started a nonprofit after going back to banking, is it's very zigzag. But I think for me, what perhaps was a turning point, and every experience adds on, and no experience is deterministic that you will inevitably be what you set out. It'll be every piece of exposure exposes you to more and more opportunities. So where you go to undergrad will not determine whether or not you can, in fact, be a doctor or be a lawyer or be something very different. The world has changed significantly. You know, we're looking for people with problem-solving skills, critical thinking, you know, can you work on a team? So anyway, long story short, I'm now running a nonprofit with my husband in India. We've been around for 22 years. And so, yeah, life is not a zigzag. And I forgot to remind you that I think my turning point was definitely at business school, where the motto at Harvard, I know it sounds cheesy, but it really, you know, had an impression on me, was leaders that make a difference in the world. And I think for me, it became, how do you use privilege, not of wealth necessarily, but how do you really use your privilege to make a better society for everyone, I think really came through for me.
That was a really good point. Thank you so much. I think hearing all of that gave me a lot of comfort, and I'm sure it gave a lot of comfort to those, especially that are going to university next year or starting to think about where they want to go for university, because I find that us 16, 17, 18-year-olds, we start planning our entire lives out, and hearing from you guys, we're realizing that it might not always be that straight linear path and that it's okay if it's a zigzag. So that gave me a lot of comfort. Thank you so much.
So our next question is a little heavier. Have you ever felt that your voice was suppressed? And if you have, what do you do when this happens? Lorraine, do you mind starting us off?
No, I don't mind. Have I ever felt my voice was suppressed? Yes, actually growing up. I didn't feel like I got to use my full voice when I was at home. And not having, you know, so I would hold back, you know, in order to adapt and to survive. And so what's interesting about that is now working in a male-dominated field, I don't have a lot of patience for my voice being suppressed. So yeah, I know, Selena, I resonated fully when I was reading your book. So yeah, I don't have a lot of patience for it because I had lived with it for so long. And you know, what do I do when this happens? I teach, actually, we have a Lean In chapter at Hydro One, and I teach a short workshop on having an assertive voice. And so what I did was I learned the difference between having a passive voice or an aggressive voice and having an assertive voice. And I always knew that I had something to say, but it was sort of teaching myself how to say it. And now whenever there's the opportunity to speak up and I feel compelled to say something or I have something to share, you're going to hear it. Yeah.
That's wonderful to hear. Neera, do you mind going next?
No, not at all. I think I'd expand the question of voice perhaps from just a different perspective, where it's not just about what are you saying, it's about what are you communicating. And I think part of our journey really rests on finding your own voice. And I think a lot of us get more and more support than at least I could say I got when I see, you know, each of you at Trafalgar. And then it becomes a responsibility to help others find their voice. And I think as women, we struggle to be open and honest when we are not able to voice. And I think there's a lot of social norms and pressure that we place upon ourselves as to when to find that voice on one hand. And on the other hand, you know, I've mentioned this before, I think on a Trafalgar panel, but it's important with this imposter syndrome. And so your inner voice, I think, really plays in more importantly to hold us back than anything else. That if you can actually, you know, break that imposter syndrome down, which is actually that voice that tells you you don't deserve to be here, actually, you know, you're a minority, you check all the boxes, that's why you're here kind of thing, plays down your voice to really come through, not just for yourself, but for what you're trying to assert. And I think that's where we need to find mentors, role models, things that give you self-confidence, right? To find that voice for yourself and for others. It is really what has held us back for all these generations. But I see that being unleashed. And I think unleashing is really important, but unleashing and bringing people along is more important. So recognizing that you might be ahead and you have unleashed your voice, But how are you going to bring others along to really make change is our biggest challenge.
Absolutely. That's a really great point. Selena, over to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to build from what Nira and Lorraine were saying. And I'm going to deviate a little bit because I don't want to repeat, but I would just say something that representation matters. So the demonstrated ability to use your voice, not to, often when I was in politics, people would say to be a voice for the voiceless. Everybody has your voice. Everybody has a voice. Sometimes it's whispered, sometimes it's marginalized, sometimes it's silenced, but everybody is talking about things. And I think that when representation matters, the person that is the representative, in quotes, then should be using their voice to amplify that of others. And I found that, like Lorraine, when I was younger, I was silenced. I didn't quite know, even when I got into politics. So it's not like when I was young, I didn't have my voice, and now I'm like here and I've arrived and I'm so strong and my voice is so loud. But even when I first started in politics, for those first 2 years, I really was unsure. I didn't want to be labeled as the mad Black woman. I didn't want to be labeled as angry. So I kind of just kept myself kind of quiet. And then I realized they are giving me the biggest megaphone in the country. Every single time I stand up, every time I open my mouth, I need to figure out what I'm going to do with it. And it's when you have that kind of realization that, like Nira said earlier, you have privilege. And it's when you recognize that you have privilege, only then can you do something good with it. If you don't recognize the privilege that you have, you'll hold on to it. But once you recognize it, you could then use it. And so even though my voice was suppressed, and maybe from my own self because of imposter syndrome, and I don't call my imposter syndrome, I call her my chief risk mitigation strategist, because she's always trying to be risk averse. And I think it's just nicer to call myself that. But my chief risk mitigation strategist says, Selena, no, you're not good enough. I have to step back into what am I here for? What is the purpose of me being here? And I realized it was to amplify those voices that are talking every single day at the water coolers at work. Some are talking about the game that was on last night, the Oscars, the this, the that, and then other people are whispering, my mental health is bad. Did you see that microaggression? Did you see that sexual assault? And people are whispering those things. Those are the voices that I found I needed to amplify, and it resonated with people, and it resonated with people that I knew were shamed for things that they just didn't need to be shamed for. And I used that suppressed voice as fuel to then amplify voices later on. And believe me, this is not like something that I've had all along. This is brand new, like 15 minutes ago. But seriously, like in 2017, I made a conscious decision, September 2017, conscious decision to start using my voice. And I think that's where the switch was. It came a little late, but at least it came.
I love what I'm hearing about using our voices and our voices being suppressed to not only amplify our own voices and kind of push back against the voice inside our head, but also using that to amplify other voices. Like, it's just so interesting to hear about that on different levels. So thank you.
Our next question is, from your experiences, what are top 3 things you have found strength in or focused on when facing challenges, risks, or difficult situations? Nira, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think looking ahead and keeping the bigger picture in mind often helps, so that you're not completely subsumed in the current moment. And so to come out of it, whatever helps you to come out of it and think of like, where is this going? What's the overall purpose? What am I trying to achieve? I think is one thing that is often helpful. I think to ask questions of yourself, to ask questions of others, and be on, a journey of continuous inquiry can help you learn, right? So life is about learning. So it's back to your first question. Is it a straight road? If you make it zigzag, you will learn a lot, right? And you will have a richer life. So asking questions, I think, is really important. And the third thing is begin to recognize your own stress symptoms, let's say. When you behave in your stress behaviors, start to recognize that, right? Can be silly things like a racing heart. So anytime I'm about to speak, I get a racing heart. I know it sounds ridiculous. I'm like 46 and have spoken about all kinds of things, but I still get super nervous. Whenever I have to write something, I'm super nervous. Or interviews. I mean, all of you are going to go through this whole journey of trying to figure out how to do interviews. In those moments, I know everybody says breathe, but it's like, that actually helps. But start to recognize, I give you those moments because those are not necessarily life-changing moments, but they help you identify stress behaviors so that you recognize you're actually functioning from a place of stress. You try and think about, okay, what is my usual behavior and where do I thrive? So folks, stop hurting yourself and beating yourself down on not being successful in certain environments and aspects. Start asking yourself, where do I thrive? And then move to environments, people, situations, and opportunities that actually help you thrive, because that's the turning point. The learning journey will be richer in the environments that are around thriving. And when you're not in one that's thriving, start to identify what's holding you back and then rally around that to change it.
Thanks so much, Nira. Like you were saying, it really comes down to being mindful and like analyzing yourself and your situation and what's surrounding you. And I feel like we kind of forget to do that. We forget to reflect. So thank you so much. Lorraine, would you mind going next?
Sure. So the top 3 things that I have found strength in or focused on, the first thing I do is I remind myself that I've been through worse. And I find that is a helpful level setting exercise of, hey, if this situation thinks that it's difficult or this person thinks they want to take me on, then they have not known what I have already been through. The second thing is, I think it's really like what Nira is saying. It's really important that we acknowledge to ourselves the difficulty of what we're going through. I think often what we do is we pretend that it's not hard and we just push our way through, and that's not really being kind or realistic to yourself. And so it means saying, hey, this is hard, and acknowledging that, but being kind to yourself in that process. What do I need right now to get through it? And then I have a quote. I have 2 quotes actually on my wall in front of me right here, but one of them is by Marianne Williamson, and it says that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. Yeah, and so I know I love it. And the third thing I do is I focus on what I'm good at, and I tuck into that, and I do what I do best every day. And a quote like this helps me remember that it's not about me questioning myself. It's not about what others may think of me. I know what I'm good at, and I'm going to do that.
Thanks so much, Lorraine. I really like what you said about acknowledging our hardships, because I feel like as females, we kind of tend to just put them aside and think like, I have to be perfect. I have to be able to handle this. Like there's no way out. So I really like how you said that. Thank you so much. Selena, would you like going next?
God, I'm feeling so hyped and inspired. This is so fantastic. So I'm going to just sort of repeat in my own way some of the things that I've heard from Lorraine and Nira. So I do apologize, but we have the same kind of lessons. The first is a lot of self-reflection. I self-reflect a lot, especially when I'm making mistakes or I'm feeling that thing. Whenever you feel like, I talk to myself a lot. So even with my chief risk mitigation strategist, she's like, girl, you're going to fail. I'm going to be, what do you mean? What am I going to fail at? She's like, well, you're going to do something. What do you mean? Come on, give me examples. Give me examples. What's going on? And then, I'll have this back and forth and my family thinks I'm crazy. But by the end, I'm like, that was a really good conversation. And we looked at all of the things that could possibly go wrong and we've mitigated them. So thank you. Are you done? And she's like, yeah, I'm done. I'm like, okay, great. We can move on. So a lot of self-reflections and reflecting on the lessons. Like Nira said, the journey, like we are often so focused on getting to the end, like getting to university, and you guys, you ladies are young. So this is not a competition. This is something that I've learned along the way, but we focus on the destination. So the destination is we get into university, we get the promotion, we get the job, we get the whatever. And we're so busy doing that we forget. And I actually bought a flower. So I I could stop and smell the roses. So you have to like put things in your path to remind you to just stop. If the journey is so busy and you don't even appreciate anything along the journey to get to that destination, how amazing is the destination going to be? You're just going to go, oh, I've reached it. Now go on to the next thing. And you're constantly going to be changing the next and chasing on to the next thing. So appreciate the journey to the destination. And last thing is the top 3 things that I focus on is my values and principles, especially when I'm in a challenge. And one of my favorite essays is written here, some of your people, Nira, the Harvard Business Review. I only have Harvard. I have like my only subscription is to Harvard Business Review. And this one is written by Clayton Christensen, who did pass a few months ago. And in his essay, How Will You Measure Your Life? Every time I'm feeling down, I read this essay, and I invite all of you students to read it. And in it, he says, the lesson that I've learned is that it is easier to hold on to your principles 100% of the time than it is to hold them 98% of the time. If you give in to just this once I could cheat, just this once I could take a little, a little this, just this once this, based on the marginal cost analysis, you'll regret where you end up. You've got to define for yourself what you stand for and draw the line in a safe space. We need to, anytime I'm making a decision about that's challenging, whether I'm leaving politics or sitting as an independent, I wager on that foundation that I spoke about earlier of my values and my principles that are anchored by some of the pain that I've been through and the lessons that I've been through that I've reflected on. And I say, where is that line? And if it means crossing that line, I will not do it. And it makes the decision tough, but it makes it very easy to do. And sometimes when you're thinking of standing on, which side do I stand on? If you're standing alone on the right side of history, it's better than standing with the crowd on the wrong side. So that really helps my values and principles.
That is so insightful. I think it can be hard to kind of identify that line of where your morals and principles stand. So I feel like identifying that is a big thing in itself, and that we shouldn't ignore what our inner heart is telling us, because that's where we start off. That's where all of our values and principles are embedded. And I feel like we should reconnect with our values and principles constantly. Thank you so much.
I'll put the essay in the chat for anyone who wants to read it.
I feel like I need to be taking notes. I'm getting such great tips and little bits of advice. So our next question is actually one that I'm really interested in. Do you find that there is less room for us as women to make mistakes? And has this ever prevented you from taking risks? Nira, do you mind starting us off?
So interesting question. I think that I don't feel that, but I'm not sure that just because I don't feel it doesn't mean others, it's not a relevant feeling, right? So I'm sure it's out there that there are folks who feel the pressure of not being able to, make a mistake. And I guess it's a bit of, if I just reflect in where I have been in largely, let's say male dominated environments, right? All the way from investment banking to, business school. I do think we place pressure on ourselves to want to be above average and to overperform because you're in a certain context. But that's a combination of not just gender, if I may say, but it's also coming with wanting to excel. So we shouldn't confuse the two, but there's a lot more pressure in that environment when you want to excel when you're in the minority. So whether it's gender or being in the minority, there are challenges when you're part of that I think we underestimate. And that's where it's really important to have a greater critical mass of minority, but it is for the majority to actually help and create a safer environment. And that's back to where I was saying, we also have to recognize our privilege, because you have to give up some privilege for making it an inclusive environment. Now, does it mean that you're not going to make mistakes? You absolutely are. But most of us, unless you're on the front line in an ER, people aren't dying because of our mistakes. So I think it also goes back to our inner voices as women we place far more pressure on ourselves. And you might blame the environment, but actually if you unleash see your own potential, find your voice, and realize you're willing to take risks, then I think all the mistakes is just, part of the learning process.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of the beauty in risk taking is the mistakes that we made. And like you said, to just lean into that and allow ourselves to embrace it. Lorraine, I'm wondering if you've ever felt that there's less room to make mistakes as a woman.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. And I do want to repeat a little bit of what Neera said around privilege. So it's a privilege to make mistakes and to be caught inside of the opportunity to make a mistake. That said, yes, I do find that there's less room for women to make mistakes, especially when women are the minority in an environment, because they're held up as the standard and are being expected to perform a certain way. And if that woman doesn't perform, then, saying, oh, this is an example of why women shouldn't be doing this position, or why, whatever, women are, not enough in a certain environment. But that said, I do believe that it is crucial we make mistakes and give ourselves permission to make mistakes. And it is by making mistakes and going through challenges that we ultimately become closer to the person that we're supposed to be. And we ultimately learn the most. And so I think I wasn't anticipating this question, but it does, I have, like I said, I have two quotes on my wall, and the other one is Brene Brown's favorite quote by Theodore Roosevelt about being in the arena and daring greatly. So you're not in the arena if you're not making mistakes.
Very well put. Thank you. What about you, Selena?
I have goosebumps. I'm loving this. So I agree with everything everyone has said so far. And, when it comes to making mistakes, I would say that, yeah, I'm always worried about making mistakes. And does it make me risk averse? No, it doesn't. It actually challenges me every time I try to, oh my God, I'm afraid I'm going to make my mistake. But then I have to stand up for something. And again, I just arrived here, okay? So this is not a competition, and I understand that there's a lot of things that people will do differently. People are not naturally as disruptive as I am, and it's just my natural state of being to be disruptive, but not to break things, like Neera said, to inspire people, because post-2020, in a global pandemic, when women, especially women of color, PSWs, nurses, frontline workers are dying, we need people who are going to take risks. And we see that with, our physicians. Physicians are usually in hospitals. We never hear them being social justice activists. We're seeing them now saying, they're putting themselves out there. They're taking that risk, even some of them at their job, to the expense of their jobs, to say, we're not just going to speak about health in terms of, your veins and your blood and your heart and things. We're going to talk about the social determinants of health and where there are inequities in that, and use their privilege to have that conversation so people can have paid benefits. And so one of I'm going to take a page out of Lorraine's book and talk about my favorite quotes. One of the things that I always talk about when I'm presenting is around transformative leadership, not transformational, but transformative. And I use the definition from Dr. Carolyn Shields, and she says that transformative leadership requires the leader to have a clear sense of their values and beliefs that undergird or form the foundation of their own identity. They're willing to take stands that may require moral courage, to live with tension or to have awkward conversations, and to engage in activism and advocacy. And if that is the mantra for your life, as it is mine, the risk-taking is a general part of it, because activism is necessary, advocacy is necessary. We're in a global pandemic talking about racial inequality with the backdrop of climate change that has not gone anywhere, with world geopolitical issues and a growing refugee crisis where 70 million people are stateless. At the intersection of that, it are those with intersecting identities. And if we're not going to take risks for them, who will? Keep going.
Absolutely. I'm sort of curious, is your willingness to take risks and embrace risks, do you think that that's something that has come as you've sort of like had experiences and with age, or is it something that's more of an intrinsic part of who you are?
Oh, do you want me to start with that?
Yeah.
Oh,
Just,
sorry.
I'm curious from you.
Yeah. So I think it is part of who I am, and I've developed it as I've gone along. And again, I've recognized that, I often say that I don't advocate. One of the things that you hear me talking a lot about is the repeal of mandatory minimums. I don't ask for the repeal of mandatory minimums because I plan on going to jail. I ask for the repeal of mandatory minimums because they're unconstitutional and they do nothing to protect Canadians. And it allows for the overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous people in our federal prisons. And so that advocacy, that unwavering determination to speak up about those issues are built on the fact that I know what inequity feels like. I know what that pain of being left and thinking that nobody could hear my voice feels like those people in prison. I know what it feels like to wish for someone to advocate for me. I know what it feels like to be on that receiving end of injustice. And so as I've gone through different pains in my life, it has built that capacity to be more of a risk taker, but not just to take risks because I want to like jump out of a plane or anything, but to take risks when it has to do with ensuring that equity is maintained.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
Our next question is kind of building off of the one that we just had. What gender-specific challenges, stereotypes, or barriers, if any, have you had to overcome during your career? Lorraine, would you mind starting us off?
Sure. So I will say that I am a small female. And so working in a male-dominated industry, the biggest challenge has been needing to be seen as a nurturer. That we think women need to be nurturing and supportive and caring. And when we deviate from those norms, it breaks people's brains. And so that's been probably one of my bigger challenges. And I've definitely worked at using that to my advantage. And more than once, I have dealt with what I perceive to be direct discrimination because of my gender when pursuing opportunities. That, again, deviating from the norm or not fitting a certain profile, it was hard for people to imagine me in a role. And so what I did is I would challenge it. I would have conversations and take steps to challenge what they were thinking. And while nobody will ever really express to you, well, the issue is you're a woman, they won't say that directly. What I can say is by speaking up and making sure that I challenge the fact that, hey, I'm interested in progressing in my career. This is the next role that I see for myself. What do you see as the challenges in front of me? And will you support me? By just having that conversation, it changed the game. And putting myself on the map and making sure that people understood where I was going, it makes it a lot harder to say no to me.
Thanks so much, Lorraine. I think that's something that we should all, build off of and trying to get there, because it's really hard to have those difficult conversations and to ask people about that to further progress as a person and in your career. Thank you so much. Selena, would you mind going next?
Oh my God, I need to read Lorraine's book. Don't know where I could find it, but I'm going to read it when it comes out. So I don't just have the gender stereotype, I also have the racial stereotype, and I identify as a cisgendered Black female. So I have the gender and racial one. And as I mentioned earlier, it was being labeled the angry Black woman, because as soon as you're passionate or you're confident, or I bring the receipts on everything. I do a lot of reading. I am a researcher by background. I've co-chaired national epidemiology studies. I've run clinical trials. Like if I'm coming with you, I'm bringing the receipts. I have the data to support anything that I say. So being labeled the angry Black woman because I demand the repeal of mandatory minimums or the expungement of records for cannabis possession because the over-incarceration of Black and Indigenous people due to urban surveillance is a violation of our human rights. Call me what you want. How I overcame it was when I realized that they're going to talk about me anyway. So I might as well give them something good to talk about. I might as well give them something that I'm passionate to talk about. It's okay, you gotta give me them stats for now, I don't mind. You know, you gotta give them something to talk about. If they're gonna say, you know, Selena is whatever because she wants repeal of mandatory minimums, go ahead, talk about that. If my biggest fault is that I want equity, if my biggest fault is challenging the fact that we have overrepresentation in our prisons, if my biggest fault is saying that I want systemic racism to be dismantled and excluded from our systems because our systems were built on exclusionary principles, our democracy was built on exclusionary principles, women were not invited, Indigenous people of color were not invited, and those were reinforced by, the status quo was reinforced by policy, the Indian Act, residential schools, 206 years of slavery in this country, and you want me to not be angry and Black and a woman? I don't know what you're expecting of me, so go ahead and talk. But I'm going to continue to be that disruptor. And I think I need to clarify a little bit what that disruption means. And I said before that not everybody is at the same level of disruption that I am. I recognize that when I speak in a certain way, that it makes people tremble. I'm not going to change that and be any more passive. My mother would appreciate if I cursed a little bit less and was a little less disruptive, but that's not who I am. And she knows that and she's okay with it. So I'm okay with it and I'll just keep going with that. But again, it's not a competition. If we want equity, we need the disruptors, but we also need the process and planners. We need everybody along the continuum.
I literally have shivers. That was so beyond powerful. Thank you so much. Nira, would you mind going next, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'm not sure I have more to say. I agree so much with the both of you. In terms of what you've all said, and I kind of wished I had known that when I was, you know, a lot younger. But I must admit that for me, a lot of my journey was about embracing masculine attributes and somehow feeling that embracing those attributes would make me more acceptable in these environments. And over time, I started to separate the fact that, am I trying to be like the guys? And so I really wanted to be a guy when I was younger, to be honest, because I just thought life felt so much easier. But then over time, and this will happen to a lot of you folk, girls from Trafalgar, you will be invited into very mainstream environments, even though you are perhaps a minority and a woman. And in those environments, you have the option to, you know, embrace these attributes or change from within. And I think my journey was around, wait a second, why am I trying to be so much like the guys? And, you know, I wanted to go out and have beers with the guys because basically if you didn't go out and banking and party with all of them, you wouldn't be in those clubs. But I recognized that part of my personality ended up being quite masculine. So first embrace that, and then recognize that you can change from within these environments, and that is very powerful as well. So not all change has to happen from outside in, and there are roles for, I cannot underestimate the roles for activism and the roles for people who have courage to change from outside in, but inside out also shouldn't be underestimated. And as you're in these environments and you become leaders in these environments, you need to create an environment that fosters change from within and holds everyone there accountable to each other. Because then you're creating these spaces where all of a sudden, okay, yeah, so I might be one of the guys, but there's a whole lot to me that's actually feminine. And can that be used to the benefit of the business, to the benefit of the environment? That's where we're seeing a real shift in the world. And that's where it rests upon each of you as the younger generation moving in to assert all these kinds of attributes are going to make the world sort of better with both kind of dignity and equity if you are enabled in some ways.
That was so, so powerful, and it really helps us reflect. I think I'm like completely moved. Thank you so much, Nira.
I feel like we need the finger snaps for all of your answers. Thank you so much. So the next one is, as the conversation of internalized misogyny has come to the forefront, and it's something that we're starting to talk about a lot more, what are your thoughts on this? And I'm curious as to how you suggest that we as women support one another. Lorraine, if you don't mind starting us off, that'd be great.
Sure. So I have been saying for quite some time that we all swim in the same water. And women are not immune from absorbing the messaging of the culture. In addition to this, when I have people say to me, I'm going to put this in air quotes, the token. So they'll say, but this woman, she agrees with me on whatever, patriarchal perspective that is. I like to point out the fact that we as women are not immune. And so having a woman agree with the misogynistic perspective doesn't necessarily make that perspective correct. And it's not an argument to say that a woman agrees with you. I believe it's really important. Let me say something else. We as strong women, I think you're hearing from Selena and Nira and myself, we all do things that support other women or other underrepresented groups because we can, and we feel that it's important, and we understand, as Selena was saying, she knows what it feels like to live inside of inequity. And so because we know the feeling of discrimination, then we want to help other individuals overcome that. I want to say that it's really important that you're kind to yourself. Do not feel the guilt or shame of internalizing what the culture has been trying to tell you. Do not feel like something is wrong with you or that you need to dismantle it all in a day. And so that part is really, really important. We put the culture, the internalized misogyny puts a substantial amount of pressure on women, and we don't need to put more pressure on ourselves. So the work that I do, the anti-discrimination work, I do it because it gives me energy, because I like doing it, because it's important, not because I feel obligated as a woman that somehow I need to make up for the fact that I've gotten as far as I can. And so now I need to catch up and get all these other women with me. That's not why I do it. So do not put that additional burden on yourself. But let me say, in terms of supporting each other, I think the important part of supporting each other is what I said earlier. Acknowledge that it's hard. Be patient with yourself and other women, and but when you're ready and you're curious and you want to educate yourself on what that means and what steps you can take, then do the research, do the work.
That's such a wonderful way of looking at it. Thank you. I think with internalized misogyny being such a systemic issue, I think that it is important to allow ourselves to give ourselves that patience to work against it and recognize that it's a product of the society that we're in, and to allow ourselves the time to learn. So thank you so much for that perspective. Over to you, Nira.
So I think this has changed over time for me, where I must admit, and I hope you all have broken this cycle, where you feel when you start off, or at least I started off my career, that there were only a few spots for the women. There's only a few spots for, people of color, women and people of color. So I was like, I want that spot. And in the process of being like, I want that spot, you start to isolate yourself from everyone else who is part of the same group, women or minorities, to differentiate yourself to be given that spot. And so you have to, I think, be careful of being competitive, but recognizing I now see the world has changed. There's unlimited number of spots for great people. And I do think use it to your advantage when you are in the minority, and not feel bashful about it, not feel that, oh, I only got it because I am, in the minority. But I think what I didn't do enough of is engage men in this journey. And I think where we've, gravitated towards, absolutely, have your women's clubs, you need women mentors, you need role models, all of us who are in leadership roles, find those young women and invest in them. But we have to bring men along in this journey and have them actually play that role as well, because this all gets shaped in your early days in your families. So often we don't have such a great crowd that's relatively homogenous. So all of you, do not underestimate the influence that your family has had on you. So deeply ingrained things like patriarchy that come definitely from an Indian culture, I could say. That would not exist in my family. So I grew up thinking like, what is this patriarchy thing? And then you go out and you're like, you know what? This is deeply embedded. And so if you don't understand mainstream culture and aspects of patriarchy that are deeply there, you're not going to break sort of this cycle. So I wouldn't even worry about the kinds of things that I did, which was like, oh, if there's only one spot and you start to become competitive with women and girls, bring them all in. We need to be politically savvy. So whoever you need to bring into your circle for you to succeed with what you're trying to achieve, you do it. Men, women, or anything else.
That's a great perspective. Thank you, Neera. Selena?
So I'm going to start with the support question and then go to the misogyny question. And I've said a few times on this call that it's not a competition. And I think it's, when I say that, it's one of the ways that I support women, because they see me and they think, oh my God, Selena's doing this and that and the other, and she's been here and there and everywhere. I just got here, like finding myself. I wrote a book on it, right? How I found my voice. It just happened, right? So I don't want people to think that it's a competition, that they need to compete with each other. We need to support each other, which is a different thing. And when I say like, I just got here, I'm 46 as well, I'll be 47 next month. And I'm still trying to figure this out. This is not like a thing where we have to fight each other on. However, when it comes to one of the other mantras that I live by, to whom much is given, much is expected, I know that in all of my life, the amount of interactions that have allowed me to be here at this present moment, there's an expectation that I give back. So supporting women doesn't mean that, I stand with Lorraine and I cry, let her cry on my shoulder. I stand with her. Supporting women means that I come back and I reach back as I climb up. So I'm giving women at Trafalgar some of this advice. I'm talking to them as well. But when you're talking about internalized misogyny or misogynoir, a term coined by queer feminist Moya Bailey, it's interesting that in 2019, when I was asked to put my needs aside to accommodate someone else's wishes, it was a very interesting moment for me, because in that moment, I could have just said, okay. But I wanted to make a very clear message, not just to the person who I was speaking to, but to myself, that I don't need to accept that behavior anymore. And if we want to sort of change how culture behaves and how organizations are run and misogyny or misogynoir, we need to decide we're not going to accept it, right? And I think that's again, not a competition, but those that can should do that. Just like those who have the ability to speak in a megaphone should speak up for issues. So if you can do it, do it. And it gives the next person a little bit more zeal to do it themselves, and a little bit more until we break that cycle. But it's not something that is just going to be gone overnight. It's something we're going to have to deal with.
Thank you for that answer. I think it's interesting that what I'm hearing from all of your answers is to not look at other women as competitors, and to realize that there are spots for women because we're just as capable as men, which is kind of an interesting way of fighting imposter syndrome, recognizing that there are spots for us and we don't need to see other women as competitors. So thank you for those answers.
Thank you so much. And just being mindful of time, I think we have reached 8:30, but I really want to ask this final question. And I don't want to stop talking to you guys because you guys are so wise and so insightful. But our final question to close out the evening is, what advice would you give to your younger self? Oh, Nira, would you mind starting us off? Thank you.
I was like, don't ask me first, but and I was only thinking of 2 words, so I may not be very articulate. Take risks. You have nothing to lose.
That was amazing. It was powerful. Thank you so much, Nira. Selena, do you mind going next?
I would tell my younger self, and I get this question a lot, do you have any regrets? Would you change anything? I always say no. I would just tell my younger self, look, you're about to make a boatload of mistakes. Just take the time to learn from them. Don't stew and sit and extend the time that you learn. Just take the time to learn from them. You turn out great at the end, but just learn from the mistake and don't beat yourself up so much, because it really delayed a lot of things from happening. And I wish I was Lorraine again, like just hearing how wise and smart and fantastic you are. I'm so in awe of you. You actually I have a lump in my throat because I just want to cry. I just think you're fantastic. I loved listening to you. I loved listening to you as well, Nero, but Lorraine is just this dynamite young person who I want to be you when I grow up.
Thanks so much, Selena. Me too. I want to be Lorraine too. Lorraine, you're so inspiring. Thank you so much. Would you mind going next?
My cheeks are like, I can feel they're on fire. Like, thank you, Selena. I
My
agree.
cheeks can't turn red.
It's in there, I promise. Yeah, I agree with the comment around what you're saying in that, so a couple things. I would say to my inner self, you're worried whether you got this, whether you're going to make the right decisions or take the right steps. All the steps you take are the right ones, because they all lead to where you need to be. But if I had to tell myself something as well, I would say, don't hustle for your self-worth. Thank you.
I'm like tearing up a little bit. That was so powerful. Thank you so much, Lorraine.
Yeah, mic drop, absolutely. Well, as sad as I am to say it, that brings us to the end of our second Women's Empowerment panel. I want to thank all of you for your incredible insight, advice, and your great conversation. I think I can speak on behalf of all of us when I say that this has been so enlightening, and we're so grateful to have heard from such inspiring women. You're all people that we really look up to. And as an all-girls school, it means a lot to be able to hear from you about what it means to be strong and empowered women. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you as well to the staff and faculty that made this possible, and to everyone who spent this evening with us. A special shout out to Ms. Welborn, Ms. Kacherka, Ms. Daly, and Ms. Farber for all their help and support in putting this event together. Just a quick reminder that a recording of this event will be shared and can be accessed on the Prefect podcast. I can see all of the amazing comments in the chat. Thanks so much, guys. I will now hand it over to our head of school, Dr. Foster, for her closing remarks. I think you're muted, Dr. Foster.
No, that is rare. I have had the privilege of just sitting here, and I started to try to take notes to say something very eloquent at the end. And on page 6, I stopped because there was just so much. We at Trafalgar believe strongly in our mission, which is to challenge her mind, strengthen her voice, and nurture her heart. And without even asking you to do that, Nira, Selena, and Lorraine, really what you've spoken to is the journey you've each been on to do those 3 things. And that is just so powerful. We've had 3 very different women with 3 very different paths. But I think what I take away that was common to all of them, and what I would encourage our students to really hear, is that the path is not going to be straight. It's not going to be smooth at times. It's going to be rocky, and you might even feel that you've hit a dead end. But if you are really guided by your values, if you understand your why, if you stay true to your true north, then, as Lorraine said, there will be no misstep. You're going to end up where you're meant to be. But I think the other thing I took away is, and this really resonated with me, the importance of really getting to know yourself, to ask yourself, why do I care what they think? Why does it bother me so much when I make a mistake and yet I am so gracious and compassionate with someone else who makes a mistake? Why is it easier to give to others than it is to give to ourselves? And I do think that that is, to a certain extent, a very gendered experience. We are often told that patience is a virtue. I'm kind of done with that, frankly. But I think that the virtue is to really look deep within yourself and to take those chances. My mantra when I came in as head of a girls' school, dealing with a network of largely larger schools, many of whom are headed by men, I decided that my mantra, and perhaps our mantra at Trafalgar, was go ahead, underestimate me, because it just gives you the space and the freedom to explore. So the last thing I would just like to say, because I think given where we are in our time in history, given the state of COVID and Neera, our thoughts and prayers go with everyone in India, and we pray that you and your family remain safe. I think that if anything, this pandemic has shone a spotlight on inequities that have been existing all along. The only difference is that we should be shocked and ashamed if we turn a blind eye to them. They have been there for generations, if not centuries. But now it's not okay just to look the other way. I hope students and our parents will recognize that privilege is something that we have. We are safe in our homes, and it's not enough just to say that we have to pay it back. We have to pay it back and provide a voice to those who do not have a voice. We have to not only get ourselves to the table, but make sure we're making room at the table for others who may not look like us, who may not pray like we do, who may not speak like we do. But if we don't, at this time in history, challenge the systemic issues that have created such horrific circumstances, largely for women, largely for Black and Indigenous women and other women of color, then personally, I'm not going to feel that I've done a good job as a head of school. So I hope you will take that away. This has been a delight. Arya and Manal, I would just like to keep you for another year at Trafalgar, if that's okay. I'm not sure you want to do that, but I see the work that you, all of our grade 12s, our prefects have done this year, and I'm going to tell you, I have great hope for our future. I really do, with the voices that I am hearing and the strength that you are each developing. So thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure, and I hope that we will have an opportunity to connect again soon. Good night.